What's up, guys? Rogue Butcher here with Unashamed Gaming, bringing you another Unashamed Bible study today. It is the, I believe, second to last one. This is chapter 23, and then we have chapter 24, and that is the end of Luke. So before we get started, I just want to remind you to be thinking about what you want in the next Bible study. We're going to wrap up with Luke, and I want to know what you guys want to go on to next. Otherwise, I'll just have to pick something. So let me know, leave a comment, whatever. If I get any suggestions, I'll probably just go with it. So just let me know about that. So we're going to pick up in chapter 23. We're going to tag on the end of chapter 22 because you'll remember last week we ended a little early just because chapter 23 kind of picks up in the middle of like a paragraph. So we're going to pick up at the end of chapter 22 right after Jesus has gotten arrested. So he's gotten arrested, and the guards are mocking him. And it says, at daybreak, the council of the elders, this is verse 66 where we're starting, verse 66 of chapter 22. It says, at daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. They said, if you are Christ, tell us. And Jesus answered, if I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. So I think what he's saying here is, you're about to kill me, and I know this. Therefore, I will go, to heaven with my Father. I'll be seated at the right hand of God. And so they take this and they say, are you the Son of God? And then he replies, you are right in saying that I am. And then they say, why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips. So this would be him speaking blasphemy in the eyes of the teachers and the elders and things like that. So this is blasphemy, punishable by death in Jewish law, and that is their basis for accusing him. Not really, that's not why they wanted him to be killed. They wanted him to be killed because they feared him. They feared the power that he held, and they knew that he spoke against them. And their position, these elders and these Pharisees, their position of power was because of who they were, with the people. They got their money from the people because they had basically say over the people. They made the laws essentially, and Jesus was speaking out against them, and he had a following. So he was basically undermining their authority, and they feared that. Thus, that is why they wanted to kill him. But this is the excuse they have for killing him, is that he's blaspheming by saying he's the Son of God. And so they take him and they lead him off to Pilate, and they begin to accuse him, saying, we have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar, which actually Jesus does not, because earlier we saw when he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, and claims to be Christ the King, which they threw this in here, the king, or a king, because in this time it would be against Roman law to say that you were a king, because only Caesar could be king of the Jews, because the Romans controlled that land at the time. So to say you were king of the Jews meant that you were trying to equate yourself to Caesar or as a king, and that would be against Roman law. And so Pilate asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus replies, yes, it is as you say. And then Pilate announces to the chief priests of the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. So he doesn't want to kill Jesus. He knows Jesus has a following. He knows that really Jesus didn't do anything wrong. And he asks if the man is a Galilean, and he is. Thus he is under Herod's jurisdiction. So Herod is like the Jewish leader, basically. Pilate would be the Roman official in that area, and Herod is like the Jewish king. I don't want to say king, but he's like in charge of the Jews there, under Roman rule though. So after finding out the man is a Galilean, he sends him to Herod, and Herod was in Jerusalem at that time. And when Herod sees Jesus, he's happy, because Jesus has a reputation. He'd been wanting to see him to hope that he could perform some miracle in front of him. So he gives him all these questions. But the chief priests and teachers of the law were accusing him over and over. And then Herod and his soldiers mock Jesus, and they dress him in an elegant robe, as if to mock, like, you're king, here's this elegant robe. And they send him back to Pilate. And it said Herod and Pilate became friends that day, and before this they had been enemies. So he's back to Pilate, and Pilate calls together everybody, and he says, you've brought me this man, and no one who has incited this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence, and have found no basis for a charge against him, and neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And you can see that he has done nothing worthy of death, or to deserve death. He says, therefore I will punish him, but then release him. And they cry out, they say, give us Barabbas, not Jesus. Barabbas, it says, had been thrown into prison for insurrection in the city, so rebellion and murder. And Pilate wants to release Jesus, so he says, he appeals to them again. They keep shouting, crucify him, crucify him. So another time, a third time, he says, why? What crime has he committed? I have found no grounds in him for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then released. But again, the louds, it says the shouts begin to, it says, with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So I guess he was, Pilate was scared of the people at this time, and he goes so far as to grant their demand. He releases the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, being Barabbas, and surrendered Jesus to the will of the people there. So I just want to note that the person they released, Barabbas, he was a murderer and like a rebel and all this stuff. He was a very bad guy, and the people chose him over Jesus because it was customary. We see in some other gospels it tells us that it was customary to release one prisoner at the Passover, and so they choose Barabbas, and that just shows how badly, I guess, that they wanted Jesus gone. They would choose this evil man over him. So they begin to lead Jesus away to the crucifixion, and Luke isn't very specific in the torture process of Jesus, which I find kind of odd because he's a doctor. Luke is known as being a doctor, and he doesn't really focus on any of the medical aspects of it like some of the other writers do. So I just want to go over a little bit. If you've seen Passion of the Christ, you see the torture scenes, and they're very graphic, but it's been said to be one of the best depictions of what a Roman crucifixion would probably be like. But they beat Jesus with a cat o' nine tails whip, which is a whip with different ends with like pieces of glass and nails and things like that tied into it. They beat him just one last short of what the death penalty would be. And they spit on him and they kick him and all this kind of things. They basically torture him to within an inch of his life. And then he's made to carry this cross, which is this part that they're about to talk about here. But they just don't talk about the torture. And I want you to understand what kind of pain that would have been before he's even on the cross. And humiliation. And so it says, as they lead him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. So he's saying, blessed are those women because they don't have children that they can lose. They don't have children that they can watch fall into the wrong hands. And then it says, For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Basically what this is saying is, if the tree is green, things are all good. If men are doing this when times are good, when they have relative freedom, they have the means to do these things, and what are they going to do then in bad times when things go down the drain? How are they going to act? How are they going to represent themselves? And so he's saying it's just going to get worse because things will get worse, and then men will behave worse. So that's what he's saying. Weep for that, not for me. And two other men, it says, were both with him, and they were also led to the cross to be executed, or led out with him to be executed. They came to the place called the Skull, the hill of Golgotha, where they crucified him along with criminals. So the crucifixion process would have been nailing his arms out to the side, probably through the wrist, and then a nail through the ankles or the feet, and hoisting him up onto the cross. And what this forces you to do is your diaphragm collapses basically, and you basically start to suffocate. But you can release it if you stand up and straighten out. But when you're hunched down, it pulls your shoulders out, probably dislocates your shoulders and collapses your diaphragm, and you can't breathe. But then if you're standing on this nail essentially that's pegged through your legs, so you can stand up on that and get some air. So that's what people would do, and they can breathe, but then you're pushing all your weight on this nail that's stabbed through your feet or through your legs, which you can imagine is excruciating pain. So you're either suffocating, which is painful, after being, beaten and whipped and all these things, or you're not suffocating, but you're standing on your like cracked bones and flesh and a nail that's through your legs. And not to mention there's nails in here. So when you're not standing, you're hanging like that, and it's pulling. It's an unimaginable pain. But that would be the gist of the crucifixion process. You could probably get even more specific if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. But so the criminals are crucified along with Jesus, one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," referring to the people crucifying him. Now, I want to point this out. This brings up an interesting question that I've talked about before in small groups and things like that. Never really an answer was given. I took a Christian theology class, and we discussed a lot of unanswerable questions, and this was kind of one of them, where Jesus is asking God to forgive the guards of their sins that they're committing. My question would be, is that enough to bring about salvation? If they are not seeking forgiveness, but Jesus asks on behalf of them anyway, does God grant that to them? Or does he just forgive them of those sins specifically, or what? It's kind of a touchy issue, because then you come into the argument of, can you become saved without specifically asking for forgiveness? And it's a very touchy issue, just one that I wanted to bring to light, that you might encounter this with that verse. So think about it and really just pray about it and study into it, and just decide, try and figure out what you believe. It's good to know what you believe about things, because there might come a time when you have to answer some questions, and you need to have some sort of stance on those things. For me, I don't necessarily want to say what I believe, but now I just said that it was important. So I'll say that I think if Jesus asks the Father to forgive them, the Father doesn't have to. Jesus also asked the Father to take away, he said, "Take this cup from me," and God didn't do it. But also I think it could be possible that that God forgave them for crucifying his son, but that does not necessarily exempt them from the penalty of sin, which is death, because of course they have other sins, and they also need to accept the crucifixion and the sacrifice of Jesus. So it's kind of a gray issue, really. But those are just some of my thoughts on it, and I want to know what you think. I'm interested to hear what you think, but I just wanted to present that to you. And then it says, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, which is a fulfillment of a prophecy saying they will cast lots for his clothes. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him, offering him wine vinegar. And they said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him and said, "Don't you fear God?" He said, "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, and this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." So I would like to make the argument that this man, this sinner on the cross, was the first one to accept that sacrifice of the cross that Jesus gave. He understood that Jesus had the power to forgive, and that the cross, that's what the cross meant, and Jesus gave him that forgiveness right there on the cross before he was even dead. So that's kind of cool. Jesus' death is next. Verse 44, it says, "In the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two." Now, some gospels say it was torn in two from the top to the bottom, and it's been said, and I've heard that, this is to signify that nothing can, no man can make the connection between humans and the divine. We could not, anything under our power is not possible to get to God, which was exemplified, by the Tower of Babel. But God, in fact, is the only one who can break that connection between the divine and us. And when Jesus died, or that, not that connection, but that separation, when Jesus died, he broke that separation. God broke that separation, and we are free to have direct relationship with God because of Jesus' death. Where was I? I lost my place. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And with that, when he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." So again, we have a Roman official, presumably somebody who had possibly crucified him previously. He's praising God, understanding that this was a righteous man. And then all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place. They beat their breast, which was a sign of mourning, being in anguish, grief, or contrition. Okay, that was a note, by the way. And so they're all in anguish about this. They understand that a righteous man has died. And then it says those who knew him, and then it says they went away. Those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance and watched these things. And then the last part of the chapter is Jesus' burial. Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man who had opposed the decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God. So he was a righteous man. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. So I believe he did this because on the Sabbath, of course, you could not do any work, so they would not have been able to bury him on the Sabbath, and they wanted to bury him. So he didn't want to wait, a whole day before they could bury Jesus because, the body would begin to rot and, vultures would peck at the carcass and things like that. So he buries him in his own tomb that very night so that Jesus can be buried without having to wait a day. And the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience with the commandment. So they don't go back the next day to find Jesus because of the Sabbath, and they can't walk in more than a mile on the Sabbath. So that's the crucifixion. It's graphic and it's sad, but it's also a beautiful picture of the culmination, really, of Jesus's ministry. Just that he would lay down his life like this in probably historically the most horrific and excruciating way possible. And that's something that I want to leave you with, a thought that I want to leave you with. Just dwell on that and understand the sacrifice that Jesus made for you and for me and what that really means. So thank you guys for watching. We have one more chapter next week, and then we're done with Luke. But I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and I really have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.